Buenos días, buenas tardes, good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, and welcome back to the Making Miami podcast. Today's guest went from RMM Records to creating one of the biggest music and event companies in all of North America. He's a legend with a career whose work spans across industries, having been part of the Presidential Commission on the creation of the National Museum of the American Latino and chairman of Facts About Cuban Exiles. His work is loud, and he's with us live. Let's please welcome Mr. Nelson Albareda to the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for that great intro, and I'm so glad to be with you. Very proud of your work and this podcast.
Thank you. I'm super excited as well. I think there's going to be a super interesting conversation for our viewers and a different topic, right? Because we haven't done anything music industry wise. And there's so much going on. So I'm really excited to cover that. And as always, I love to get into my guest stories and how they got to where they are today. You started really young in the music industry at just 14 years old, and you've done a little bit of everything, advertising very heavily, music, but you had an insane encounter as a freshman at Miami-Dade College with Bacardi executives where you pitched a branded entertainment concept that mixed music and cigars and the whole lifestyle around big band style music and enlisted the iconic Celia Cruz. So tell us about that story, that meeting, and how it brought you into the music industry, how you got started.
Yeah, so I had this idea. Obviously, in the 90s, cigar smoking wasn't as hip as it is today, and Latin music wasn't as hip. And the idea was to create this branded concept called Havana Nights that would celebrate the 1950s of big band era of Cuban music, bringing cigars, music. It was called Havana Nights. And I had a friend who took me to Bacardi, and I thought it was going to be a $30,000 project, and it turned into a $2 million project. And of course, we needed like big band musicians, including the legendary Celia Cruz, Tito Puente. So with Bacardi on my side, we went and approached Celia and her label RMM Records. And at that point, one of the guys over for the label, he goes, "Hey kid, what do you do?" And he's like, "I really like you. Do you want to come work for us?" And that started everything. I went to work for RMM Records, Ralph Mercado, who was a pioneer. It was like the Motown salsa. Not only did we have Celia, Tito Puente, but then we discovered Mark Anthony, La India, and many artists. And it was a great opportunity, obviously, at a very young age.
Of course. And how did you even get in the room as a young man? You know, you're 18, 19 years old. How are you approaching these executives and you're pitching this idea to them?
Well, I had an idea. So I had a friend and I told him, "Listen, if you get me into the room, I'll give you 50%. And that friend knew the chairman of Bacardi. So I was able to get in. I didn't know what I was doing. Back then, there wasn't PowerPoint decks. I mean, it was just a printed document. So the last page had the price. So when we got to the last budget page, I go to all these guys. By the way, I called them FBC guys. FBC stands for fat, bald, and Cuban. And all the guys I worked back then, today, by the way, I'm fat, bald, and almost Cuban. I mean, I'm Cuban and almost bald. And I came into these guys, they weren't interested. And then halfway through the meeting, they started sitting up and they loved the idea. And that's how it happened.
That's incredible. And, you know, that era of Miami music was so iconic in particular. And you've been quoted as saying that much. You said, "I grew up in a moment where Miami defined different sounds within the music business and always wanted to be part of that primarily because of the culture and the heritage of my parents." You've talked about in the past how Celia, Willie Chirino, and watching Gloria Estefan's Miami Sound Machine at the Calle Ocho Music Festival inspired you so much. Miami during that time, like I said, was a revolution of Cuban sound mixed with a little bit of disco, pop, salsa. Talk to us a little bit about Miami, what Miami was at that time, what the music scene was like, and how that and your Cuban upbringing impacted you.
Yeah, I think it was a unique time. You know, I was born in the late 70s, but growing up in the 80s and 90s, it was a unique time where Miami was really making it happen, right? Making it happen to what it is today, that rich cultural heritage. And, you know, in the case of Willie Chirino, I remember, right, I would tell any girl that I knew, "Hey, if you get tickets to go to a Willie Chirino concert, or if you know he's playing anywhere, I'll go with you." Right, I was looking anywhere I can tag my along as a date to be able to see Willie Chirino. And it was like seeing Gloria at Calle Ocho, seeing Willie Chirino at events. Obviously, whenever Celia would come to town, it was really part of the fabric. Cachao, who was the creator of the Mambo, who actually used to play at restaurants here until Andy Garcia and Emilio brought him back. So the fusion of so many other bands and who really embodied what Miami is, to me, is part of my DNA. And I was like, hey, how do we preserve that so that my kids and my grandkids can understand that heritage?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people forget just how significant Miami Sound Machine, Gloria in her early days were, Celia, Willie, all these people, because they opened up the music scene for other Latinos. If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have modern day reggaeton. Bad Bunny wouldn't exist. All these people wouldn't exist. And that started here in Miami because of things like the Calle Ocho Festival. And we actually talked about it recently on the show because I brought Willie Bermeo on and he was part of the Kiwanis and the whole thing. And he talked about how bringing Gloria onto the festival was such a turning point culturally, not just for the festival, but for Miami. Like these artists made a huge impact.
Listen, there's no doubt in Miami, a lot of people think about Latin music. I mean, the Bee Gees recorded here, Michael Jackson recorded here, Eric Clapton recorded, soul music, disco, everything that's 60s and 70s. And then that all these Latin, music really brought it together. Carlos Olivas and Los Sobrinos de Juez, which are really the first guys that create the Miami sound, then Willie, then Gloria. It was a unique moment that I think will always shape Miami.
For sure. And so your evolution as a young man doing this event, working with Celia, kind of developing your expertise in marketing and all that wheelhouse, the catalyst for your predecessor company, Loud and Live, was Eventus. And at that point, there was a point there where you had lost $3 million in your very first weeks as a company, in your very first company. Unipro. I'm sorry, I got a little bit stuck.
Yeah, it was Unipro, then Eventus, and now Loud and Live.
And then you were able to buy out your partners and start Eventus after the whole situation with Unipro. How did you overcome such major obstacles, and why in the midst of a huge loss did you decide to buy up more of a share in what was a failing company?
Look, I think, being an entrepreneur is hard. And the biggest benefit or the biggest lesson that I have is that when you fall, you got to get right up quickly and learn from your mistakes. And I think that was something that really helped me was every time I fall, which hasn't been once, you get back up and you learn from it. And I doubled down on what I believed. I think a lot of people really know me because of the music, but I'm really, at the end of the day, while I love music, I love marketing. And that was a pivoting point where I moved from events into marketing. I started working, my first big client. I did work for the Latin Grammys, and then I did work for McDonald's. And once I started working for McDonald's, and all the other brands came, like Dr. Pepper and Snapple Group and Walmart and Verizon, Kimberly-Clark, Nestle. And that really led me to growing Eventus with a very strong foundation on big brands.
Yeah. And so Eventus eventually kept growing. It got bought out. You were with them for a little bit, and then you started Loud and Live. And I don't think a lot of people realize, because Loud and Live is such a titan, how young of a company it really is. It's only about 9 years old. You left Eventus in 2016, and a huge determinant of your success in the early days was that you didn't just go after urban music right away, but instead, when you looked to shift, to shift your image from marketing into like the events and the music space more directly, and brands to tours. You went after a few key artists, which were Juan Luis Guerra, Ricardo Arjona, Carlos Vive, Franco De Vita, and Ricardo Montaner. Why these artists specifically, and how did Loud and Live come to dominate the space in such a short time?
Look, I think the strategy on the music was what you call singer-songwriters, right? Singer-songwriters and all the ones that you described are people that write their music. And I call those are artists that other artists respect. Why? Because you just don't sing, but you're very talented. You write songs for others. You're a singer-songwriter. And the strategy was that those artists would then tell all the other artists, hey, what a great company Loud and Live is. And our focus has been on two. One, artist focus on artist-centric, what we call a Loud and Live difference, catering to them and with little details that are important to them. And then really, how do you really overserve fans? And the foundation of going over everything that was not urban music is actually what really led Loud and Live to grow quickly. I think a lot of people don't know my background was marketing, and the reason why we start with sports and with entertainment is I had to non-compete. I couldn't work with brands. And we said, hey, what is really a 360 company today? And it's not just, there's companies that work with brands, but we say we convert culture into commerce, right? How do you get a cultural nugget, whether it be music, anime, fashion, food culture, sneaker culture? And that is why we start Loud and Live with being a culture company. And then eventually we go back and launch the agency on the marketing side. Of
course. And so in being such a diverse, like full wheelhouse company, you're actually able to round out these artists better, right? Because they're singer-songwriters. So in that essence, they bring already so much to the table, especially nowadays when so many artists can't write their own songs and they don't play instruments. It's not the big band era. People like Cachao that knew how to sing, write, and play their instruments, for example. And so you guys kind of cater to that and round out your artists really well. And like you said, Loud and Live and you are not just music, but they're marketing. you have a huge background in that marketing scene, and you do a lot of other projects besides music related stuff, which is, it's easy to pigeonhole Loud and Live as just music, but it's not. You guys do House of Horror, the Grove Arts Festival, Country Bay Music Festival. You know, why was it so important to not just stay in that one niche, and how does it work within your flywheel business model?
Yeah, so first of all, you're right. We have the marketing side, the entertainment, and a big event base. I think that being a global international company, yet all of our executives are born and raised in Miami in South Florida, Dade County. And we're very proud of being a homegrown company. And we want to, A, have as much presence in our own backyard, and then B, give back as much as we can to the community. So yes, you're right. We have these large footprint events, you know, House of Horror, Christmas Wonderland at Tropical Park, Coconut Grove Arts Festival. We, this year, you know, also now have Tropical Park, where we're trying to add as many events and programming as we can for the community, from an Asian culture festival to Feria de Sevilla to Albarejes, which is comedy. We have the Doral Amp, where we just had a Gran Combo and Elvis Crespo.
That was fantastic.
Yeah, we have an upcoming event celebrating World Cup in Colombia with Fonseca. So the idea is, how much can we give back via programming and also through our foundation and help the community? We're thankful for everything we've gotten, both on the brand side, on the music side, and on an international level. And how do we have a strong presence in Miami-Dade County?
Yeah, and I think that plays really well into your MO, which is what you said, turning culture into commerce, right? And really bringing that to the fans, to the people, and really diversifying what you're bringing forth, not just music, but comedy, entertainment in other regards, the stuff with the World Cup, etc. You know, how do you think this plays in, if at all, with the trends you're seeing in the music industry as a whole? You know, there's so many changes. Like, there was that new Supreme Court ruling regarding Ticketmaster, and so many other societal changes post-pandemic. You know, what is the state of the music industry as you see it right now, and what are people looking for out of their experiences?
Look, I think that with technology continuing to grow, and I said this the other day, people have such a short span of attention right now. You used to go to a show and it'd be an hour and a half, and people would say, "Oh, what a short show." Now you do an hour and a half show, and people are like, "Oh, this was so long." And I think that the main difference is that with technology continuing to grow, experiences, whether it be an experience with a brand, an experience with music, an experience through culture, to anything that's culture, it's not going to go away. And so what we're seeing is that people want more and more and more of those life experiences, because technology can't give you that. On the legal side, I mean, yeah, listen, there's, you know, Ticketmaster and the DOJ ruling, and on the music side, currently, on the Latin side, we're the only independent left, large independent in the U.S. There was another independent who got bought out by AEG. So it's Loud and Live against AEG and Live Nation, which are our titans. And, you know, we continue to be that independent little engine that can, and we continue to hit it. But it's tough to compete. It's tough also for fans, because they have to pay the ticket surcharges and all that stuff that you read.
Do you think now, like after everything that's been going on, that people are looking for better, more independent experiences, that they're looking to push away from the larger conglomerates and go towards companies like Loud and Live and what they're putting out?
Look, I think that what we do better than them is obviously the marketing and the attention to detail. So to those experiences being very tailored and being very culturally relevant in nuances. We really understand how to cater to local communities. How do we, you know, even in Miami with so much diversity, how do you cater to a Haitian versus a Colombian versus a Cuban versus a third generation Cuban-American? So I think that we're able to tailor those experiences and actually reach them in a much better experience than our competitors.
Yeah, you definitely are. And I think it really jumped out to me, especially when I went to Albarejes, which I want to talk a little bit more in depth about later, but just the general production of it all. First of all, you were right in touching on something earlier, which is the attention span. Like nowadays, I can't even upload a 2-minute video to Instagram without people scrolling away in a few seconds. So you're looking to retain attention and quality for as long and as best as possible. And I think the scale of your production and the way you did it, right? You're in Tropical Park. It's the middle of the summer. Everyone's sweating. And yet you managed to create a super comfortable environment. You walk into the first little room and it's like you're back in a Cuban house and you have all the pictures all over the place. And it's really just an immersive experience. And you're really bringing forth that quality into the product, right? So you guys really do deliver that so well. And so moving now into like a couple of your projects, right? Because I think this is a really good segue. Not too long ago, we saw Loud and Live get involved with 100 Years of Celia Cruz. A lot of your projects have to do with your Cuban roots and are inspired by our culture. Going back to your upbringing as a young man, your family was working class. You're the son of exiles. And as a young boy, you even helped your father paint buildings, scrub toilets. To go from that to meeting with Bacardi, working at RMM as a college freshman, to now where you get to handle projects that frame the legacies of legends like Albareda, like Celia. You largely frame your work in this aspect nowadays as the work of preserving each of every one of us, of El Exilio. How do you bring a piece of your roots, of the young boy who worked with his father, into each of your projects that you do, and how does it affect the outcome of your large-scale events like the 100 Years of Celia?
Look, I think it's the American dream. I say that I'm Cuban-American, I'm American-Cuban, right? Interesting to hear you say exilio and you're, 20-something years old, right? Which makes me very proud, which is while we're American and we are as American as apple pie, and this is an amazing country, it's the country that opened our doors to our parents. In the case of specific Miami, which is very pertinent to this podcast, I think that Cuban exiles had a huge contribution to what the city is today. And when I do all these projects, the only goal that I have is to preserve that legacy of the 60s, the 70s, the 80s that made Miami who it is today because of my parents. And that is why the Celia Cruz project, 100th, centennial celebration, that album we won a Grammy, or a Latin Grammy with it as well. And the interesting thing is that album was recorded in a nightclub in Miami in the 1980s. So everything that I do is that every couple of years I have a passion project. I've done the Willie Chirino 35th, 50th, Cachal's 80th, Celia, and now this Albareda's project, which you talk about. The idea is, when the county came to us and said, hey, there's an RFP for Tropical Park. We wanted to create more programming and utilize that park. And that park had a very big contribution being in the middle of Westchester, which is a predominant Cuban exile neighborhood. And we could have done Albareda's in Wynwood, and it would have probably been a little bit cooler. But how do we transform Tropical Park and utilize it for culture, for arts? You went to the show. A lot of people think it's a comedy show. It's really a theater that we popped up, an immersive theater in the middle of Tropical Park. And we thought it would be fitting there, and you saw it. And by the way, that's one show where we've seen a lot of people say, wow, it's a long show. It's a 2-hour show. And we're like, hey, that's art and culture. It's theater.
Yeah. No, and I remember that was your first question to me after I finished. You're like, is it too long? And I was like, no, I want more.
Yeah.
And honestly, it really did. I not to flatter you or anything, but genuinely, I love that show so much. I left feeling so happy and proud to be Cuban. Fíjate que I bought my mom tickets as a late birthday present. I left the show and I called my mom. I hadn't even gotten to my car from the ballet yet. Yo le dije, mami, I bought you tickets for that dia. We're going to go. Because it did such a fantastic job of doing exactly what you just said. And I find that incredible in your projects, and that el exilio, el valor del exilio is immeasurable. And I'm going to tell you why. First of all, so many of our original people from El Exilio are now unfortunately passing away. And so it's up to people like you and me who are younger to keep that history alive and keep working and doing projects like the ones that you're doing. And number two, because people have a lot of misconceptions over the work and the labor that Cubans faced when we got here. I remember my dad got here in 1969. When my dad got here in 1969, there were places that had signs that said no blacks, no dogs, no Cubans. My dad and his friends that were other Cubans, they were the only ones that spoke Spanish. There were not other Hispanics here. It was a predominantly Anglo and Jewish community, which was fine, but we had to do a lot of work in breaking those borders. And that community came, and first of all, we were exiles, and that means, and that is significant because we came with the mentality that we were going to go back. We came with the mentality that one day we were going to go back to Cuba. My own great-grandparents and grandparents didn't buy a house or property for a while because they thought, oh no, we'll go back porque Fidel se cae any day now. Castro's going to fall any day now, and we're going to go back. And so over time, we of course realized that wasn't the case. And the contributions to the Cuban community to Miami completely changed what this was, because Miami looked like Homestead. My dad used to say all the time, Miami looked just like how Homestead looks now, if not even less. And so we brought business and we brought culture, and really we transformed the city into what it is today. And then we fought for other Latinos, right? A Cuban-American politician, Mario Diaz-Balart, passed NACRA, which was for Nicaraguans. And nowadays, Cubans protest alongside Venezuelans. And so we opened the door for all of them to come here, now to a place that speaks Spanish, whereas it didn't speak Spanish before, and where others can feel comfortable, and it's a world-class city. And so that's why I love so many of your projects, because they really encapsulate the spirit of us and the community and the history of what this beautiful city has been through.
No, there's no doubt. And look, on that note, I think that the history of Miami and the influence of Cubans is huge. And then when you look at how it's shaping now, the influence of Argentinians, of Venezuelans, of Colombians, that's why even now with Doral, we're doing a big celebration with World Cup to celebrate Colombia. How do we continue to grow what our parents did, what Cuban Americans and Cuban exiles did for the city, and yet make sure that it doesn't, not be forgotten?
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's another super cool project you did, which also takes us back to classic Miami, which was the revival of Que Pasa USA. I love Que Pasa USA. And I think every Cuban American of a certain age in Miami can remember the show and has fond memories of the Peña family, and Stephen Bauer's Joe, and really just absolutely everybody, Carmencita, la vecina gringa, everybody. And so looking at them and also the show, it was meant to be representative of Cubans and the Cuban family of the time, and in many ways it really was. So how did you see yourself and perhaps your own family represented in the project, and is that why the revival in part went to such great lengths to bring back many of the original actors as possible when bringing it into a modern time?
Well, before I answer that, I have to tell you that like about 2 minutes ago you reminded me about Que Pasa without asking the question, because you said El Exilio and then you said Cuban exiles. And one of the things that Que Pasa did is that it was really created to teach Cuban immigrants or exiles English.
Mm-hmm.
So they would say, "Hey, mommy, do you know that I want to go to the movies?" And then, "Oye, Pepe, que lo que la niña quiere ir a cine." So you said exiles y exilio. Listen, I think if you grow up in Miami and you are Cuban or even immigrants, because the story of La Familia Peña was not just a story of Cuban exiles. It was the story of any immigrant. And if you are kids or parents or grandparents of exiles or anything, you identify. I think it was a work of art, something that I grew up with. And that was another legacy project. How do we bring it back? And we brought it back 40 years later, which is interesting. Next year, which is 2027, is the 50th anniversary of Que Pasa. And I'm going to say it here for the first time. I have an idea, so there might be another Que Pasa project for 2027.
Oh, excited. Do you have anything else you could tell us about the project yet? Or are we going to...
No, it'll be different.
Okay.
The first time that we brought it was back on theater, and it was bringing back the whole familia, Peña. 40 years later, where's everybody at? This will be a different twist, but I'll say that for our next podcast.
Well, I think that's going to be a great time, and I'm definitely excited to have you back again later to talk about the whole Pepe Peña crew and everything that we can expect to see. And definitely, right, the family is so iconic. And you're right, the show was made to teach people, recent immigrants, English.
Correct.
And it does such a wonderful job at that because you don't notice it.
Correct.
You really don't notice it. And it is a work of art. I think they really don't make programming like that anymore.
They do not. And I think Luis Santero, who was the writer of that, was definitely a work of art. He went on to do Sesame Street. So,
yeah. No, Sesame is another one that has another huge Cuban influence. I mean, I think we had episodes with Celia Cruz.
Yeah, we did.
And a lot of the writers, like you said, were Cuban, and they're another huge influence there. So finally, let's talk about Álvarez Guedes. You guys extended the show for another few weeks through June, which is amazing. I think I'm super glad you guys did that. But after you passed, you had received permission from his widow to do it. And originally it looked super different. It was going to be at the Adrian Arch Center. Then you guys got the RFP at Tropical Park, how you talked about. And I think it worked out great because, like you said, that's a center of the community there. Talk to me a little bit about this new experience for people that aren't like me and haven't been able to go, what it looks like and how it honors Álvarez Guedes and his insane legacy that paved the way for all Latino comedians now, like Fluffy, Marcelo, and others.
I mean, listen, there's two things. First of all, Álvarez Guedes is what we consider the father of Latin comedy. He was the Richard Pryor of Latin, not only Cuban, where he opened up the door to stand-up comedy. Number two, he was famous across the Americas, but he was an iconic, Miami guy of the 70s and 80s. I think a lot of people don't realize that outside being a comedian, he was a big culture tastemaker and creator. He started a record label named Gema. So he's the one that signed from Elena Burke to Olga Guillot, Rolando Las Series, legends of Cuban music in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. He then goes on because he had an office in Puerto Rico and he signs a band called Cortijo y su Combo, which later he renamed El Gran Combo de Puerto Rico, which, as you know, Bad Bunny, you mentioned earlier, has one of his biggest songs, Nueva York, and that is a song that came out of El Gran Combo. And then even Albareda, one of the last artists that he signed was Willie Chirino. He had a huge influence on basically music, on arts, on comedy, and on typical Miami culture. A lot of his jokes are still as valid today as they were, 50 years ago. So he never had a big tribute alive. So we said, hey, why don't we come up with a tribute? Originally it was going to be at Adrian Arch. We had announced it, but then COVID hit. And literally, so for those that had not gone, what we did is created an experience, building out temporary structures in tropical parks. A lot of people say, hey, at the Roxy, at the Performing Arts Center, in the middle of the park. As you know, we build like a little village right in the middle of Tropical Park. And it's an immersive experience. First, you go to a bar. It's a 1980s bar. It's called El Bar de Chicho. And you sing along, you have some drinks, you enjoy, and then you go on to a cabaret, which was inspired in a 1980s cabaret that was here in Miami called Los Violines. Once you're there, you feel you're in a cabaret, full AC, food, drinks, everything. And it's a full show with dancers, musicians, and of course, an actor that is phenomenal named Ariel Texido, who is Albareda. You also have Rubén Rabasa, which a lot of you might see, another legendary actor. You go through the show, which is about 2 hours, and then you have a third experience, which you can hang out after the show, smoke cigars, eat drinks at El Patio.
Yeah, no, and the experience is so much more even than what it sounds like. I was significantly impressed by absolutely everything, and I was really surprised by how thorough and really just diverse the experience as a whole was, the different elements that you guys all put into it. It was a super fun show. Really, the time flies by like that because you're too busy laughing and just really enjoying everything. And myself, I really enjoy a lot of your projects because I think everybody that watches the show can tell I'm really proud of being a Cuban-American. And even when I've done my own projects for Cuba, I call them my love letters. Each of my projects is like a love letter to Cuba. My first one was a short film that I did on the anniversary of the Peter Pan flights, and that one was with Max Alvarez and Carmen Valdivia. My second one is one that's currently in the works, and that's my second love letter. My third one was the 20 de Mayo event that I hosted recently for Herencia Cubana, and we really honored, first of all, the 30 years of that nonprofit that does preservation of Cuban history, 20 de Mayo, which is no longer celebrated on the island,
Yep.
and so we must preserve, absolutely. And of course, we got to celebrate the bonus surprise, which was the indictment of Raúl Castro. Right. But do you feel like, in a way, not just that these projects, Que Pasa, Celia, all of them, are not just like your love letters, but that Albarez has been probably one of your biggest dedications to the Cuban community?
Not really. I think that every project that I have done has a different angle to the Cuban exile story. They all have, because they all were passionate people that started in Cuba, were started here, and have given a lot. I think the Albareda is maybe unique in that it's not a music project. It's also the only project that I've worked on big that I never met the person that it's based around, right? I worked with Celia. I worked, obviously, Willie's still alive. I worked with Cachao, Que Pasa. Many of the actors were still alive and still part of our culture, but I never actually got to work with Albareda. But I think, I think like you, I'm very proud. You mentioned FACE, Facts About Cuban Exiles, which I'm currently the chairman. And, it's a nonprofit, and the sole role of it is, to promote and to defend Cuban exiles and the Cuban exile story. And today, as Sam Verdeja, which is one of our founders, says, Cuban-American or American Cubans. So wherever I can donate my time to preserve the legacy, today we're Americans, but can't forget where our parents came from.
Absolutely. No, we can't do it. And, when you work on projects like these, like Albareda, like the 100 Years of Celia, it not only does it preserve the story, but it educates others. And a lot of people don't really realize that not only did Cubans pave the way, but we helped, for example, like Celia spent huge stretches of time in Mexico, for example. And Albareda, like you said, had a huge role in the success of a Gran Combo de Puerto Rico. Celia helped popularize singers like Mark Anthony, like La India, because she would bring them on stage with her as young performers. And you've mentioned in the past how the projects you enjoy working on the most are those that elevate our culture and fuse nuestra herencia, cultura y a diferentes generaciones. That's what you had said. How do you continually honor that commitment? And how does your work as chairman of FACE and your other projects, like the ones I mentioned in the intro, like the Museum of the Latinos, play into keeping that story alive?
Look, I think I've been blessed by God with a lot of success. And I think there's two things. One, in everything that I do outside of culture and legacy is giving back to our community. Every project that we do has a giving back, whether it be scholarships for kids to be able to go to, a university that they want to, that they can't, whether it be Berkeley or Juilliard School of the Arts, whether it be giving back to boating safety, which is very close to me. So every project that we have has some type of giving back to the community. In addition, I personally have a culture which is how do we keep that legacy alive? You said earlier, for instance, I remember my dad, and there were signs in apartments that said, no blacks, no dogs, no Cubans. That's actually in the Albareda show. And it was interesting because I was sitting watching the show with three gentlemen that were not Cuban-American. And they were like, wow, is that real true? And I just picked up my phone, I Googled it, I go, look, here's a sign in the 1960s in Miami. They're like, I couldn't believe that. So it's not just about the culture, but it's about education. I have a 24-year-old son, a 22-year-old daughter, and an 18-year-old boy. They went to the show and they loved it. So the idea is, how do we continue to, first of all, elevate culture in Miami? The Albareda show is a theater show. Which it's, I always think that we still need to continue to raise the bar with culture, arts, and theater in Miami-Dade County. And then at the same time, paying heritage to what the city is.
Yeah. And you mentioned how, you love to give back to the community, and you touched a little bit on the projects, but I'd love to talk about them more in depth, because Loud and Live is a national company. You guys do work all over the place, but you're really local, right? And you really give back a lot to our community. You talked a little bit about the scholarships. What are some other examples of stuff you guys do?
Yeah, so we have a Loud and Live Foundation, and as part of the DNA of the organization is that we need to give back to the communities that serve us. So it's simple. So let's just say with Christmas Wonderland at Tropical Park or House of Horror, we have a pet adoption program. So we partner up with the county. It's Christmas. People want to go out and maybe buy a puppy to get to the kids. Hey, how do we bring adopt a pet and adopt pets at Christmas Wonderland, which attracts so many people? We do a police explorer night where we work with different municipalities across the county to bring different explorers, not only for them to enjoy that night, but to understand like security risk at an event. I mentioned scholarships. So we work with the Latin GRAMMY Cultural Foundation, which a lot of people don't know that is actually based right here in Doral in Dade County. How do we provide scholarships to kids across Latin America that wouldn't be able to? Boating safety. We did a boat show. So how do we continue to give back? And like that, the idea is that every project we have, we help. We have a trailer called the Sensory Unit, and it goes to events, and it's a sensory room with people with autism or sensory perception issues. So the idea is everywhere we work, how do we give back a little bit to the community?
That's absolutely fantastic. And thank you so much for giving back in that way, because it's really easy when you have a company like that to just, not do so, right? And so I think, especially with the autism, that's a really close cause to my heart, because my brother's disabled. He doesn't have autism, but I always appreciate those efforts, and the scholarships and all the different things you're doing. Those are beautiful ways of really turning the fruit of your labor into something that's really not just for the company and for your workers, but really for everybody, right? Loud and Live is a community company. And so considering the amazing work you've done as an entrepreneur in the entertainment industry for the Cuban community, you've talked about how, you've said, mi ser es unir. So at the end of the day, what do you want to be remembered? Do you want to be remembered as the guy who gave it all? What do you want your legacy to be?
Look, I think it's easy. Money doesn't define me. Success doesn't define, but bringing people together does. The biggest thing that I have in everything I do, whether it be on the marketing side or event side, is when you see people, coming together. You mentioned about your brother. at Crystal's Wonderland, we launched last year this project called Silent Nights, which is if you have a sensory disorder, lights and sound affects you. We were able, by doing that on a couple significant days where lights were not moving and the sound was off, so we called it Silent Nights, we were able to bring together tons of families with kids that usually wouldn't be able to enjoy an event like that. I want to be defined as being people that brought my friends together, brought my family together, and that brought our community together.
Yeah. And I think that's the best note that anyone that's watching can take away. Thank you, Nelson, so much
thank you so much for the conversation. Thank you for opening the doors to our podcast. We didn't mention it, but you went to my alma mater, La Salle. So wherever I can help you and mentor you, please make sure you call me. Very proud of the work you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And of course, thank all of you for watching.